Welcome everyone to the Vermont Vegetable and Berry Grower Association webinar series. Today's webinar features Chris Callahan and maybe some Andrew Chamberlain and Hans Estrin contributions to the topic of bags, liners, and bins. Take it away, Chris.
Thanks, Vern. Afternoon, everybody. This is a presentation about bags, liners, and bins, and I will be the one doing most of the presenting, but Andy and Hans, of course, are always major contributors to much of the content we talk about, and it's a team effort, and also a ton of input and experience and expertise coming from the growers of the VVBGA, as always. A lot of what I'll be talking about and a lot of what we've pulled together comes from listserv conversations and discussions, as well as some discussions on social media and other places where people are always so free with their experiences and lessons learned, so we don't repeat the same mistakes. The bulk of the bin and container discussion is based on a blog post that we have on the Ag Engineering blog that's focused on bins and totes and whatnot, and I'll provide a link for that. The bags and liners discussion is a bit of new territory for me in this kind of format, and one thing I've learned is there's a whole lot more to learn, but hopefully we'll at least start to pull together some good information. So why this topic? It seems like just about every 3 to 6 months there's a question on the listserv about the best tote, bin, container for fill in the blank, or what kind of bags are people using for this, that, or the other thing, and where do you get them, and how much do they cost? And so I know I've been sometimes the one asking those questions as well, and so it is always helpful to try to get that information summarized in one place, and I thought a webinar on the topic might be a nice addition to the listserv discussion. So here are the key points. If you have to step away, you can step away with the key points. As with most things, the best thing to use depends on the crop, depends on the scale or volume that you're planning to use the bin or container or bag for. Depends a lot on how you plan to move product, literally moving product. Is it by hand? Is it by fork truck? Do you have any sort of conveyors or other mechanical systems in place? And also how you're planning to store. So most of this is going to be focused on bags used or containers and bags used for storage. I do get a little bit into containers used for retail marketing, although it's definitely not my strength. But it is increasingly an important topic, and we'll do our best to stay ahead of the curve on that going forward. As with most things, it pays to plan well ahead on these purchases, particularly because you're usually buying more than just one or two. So you get a better deal if you buy in larger volumes, and so sometimes that means you're working with vendors who you need to request quotes from, and shipping is usually can be a bit tricky, or especially especially around certain quantities. And shopping around for the best price, selection, and availability, it definitely is favored by planning as far ahead as you can. There have been bulk buy programs in the past that have made this a little bit easier for the individual. There are sometimes impromptu sort of buddy buys, or someone who's planning to put a large order in, and they might reach out on the listserv and see if others want to do it. That can certainly help bring costs down. But in talking to the people who have done some of that, it can be a real drag. So if you do take advantage of one of those opportunities, just be super respectful of the people who are doing the lift on that. And then the other key point is, I think it's really important to think about what your cleaning and sanitizing plan is especially for containers and bins, and to some degree how bags and liners might fit into that. So this is what we plan to cover. On the the topic of containers, lots of different names for these things. Everybody seems to use a different one. Totes, lugs, cartons, bins, boxes, crates. You know, it doesn't really matter what we call them, although it is helpful to know that there are a lot of terms being used, particularly when you're searching for them online. Different vendors even call what looks exactly the same something different. So it's helpful to just be familiar with the different terms used. In the short link in the lower left-hand corner there, go.uvm.edu/totes is what we've collected on this topic so far, including some of the terminology that vendors use and other people use, as well as sources, who the vendors are and what they sell. And Andy's done an amazing job pulling together a photo gallery of the different containers and products available, which really serves as a nice visual reference. So these are some of the things to think about here listed in the bullet points. You know, what crops are we talking about? How much are we, you know, and a sort of a key question here is, how does the product get moved? If it's moved by hand, that's one thing. If we're talking about bulk storage and using a fork truck or pallet lift, that's clearly another. And so being aware of when it makes sense to move from one size container to another is really helpful in your farm planning. How cleanable is the container? Do you need vented sides? So on the picture here, pictures here on the right, you see a couple different examples. The Buckhorn example is a solid container, so that's really good for retaining humidity in the enclosed space, but wouldn't do much for helping you cool something down. So if something is packed in one of those containers, has a lot of field heat and goes in a cooler, it's going to take longer to cool down than, for example, in the bulb crate with vented sides right above it. So yeah, the other key factor is how well these things stack when you want them to stack and nest when you don't want them to stack. And so we'll get into these one by one. So bulb crates, super common. It's sort of hard to, we don't have any hard and fast numbers on this, but it seems like bulb crates are one of the most common container used on farms. Also one of the most commonly sold used, and at a very reasonable price, as low as $1 or $2 per crate from bulb dealers, for example, where that's how they receive the bulbs. And we have a couple of sources listed on the website on the blog post about this. They stack easily and well when used. They're secure. They have vented sides, which helps with cooling and draining. They're relatively easy to clean, although anything with this many nooks and crannies and high surface area does take some attention and some real intention when cleaning. The one downside that I know of on bulb crates is when they're empty and you're just looking to store them, they take up quite a bit of space. There you can get creative with, you know, stacking one vertically inside of two horizontally. It's not particularly stable, and anyway, they just take up more room than some alternatives when stored empty. Rough costs there. They're sometimes referred to as returnable plastic crate, multi-use container, or even a shellfish box, just in terms of having other terms to search for these things. Again, we have a list of vendors on the blog post. The next container I want to talk about is what we generally refer to as either a Buckhorn or a flip top tote. These are also known as handheld containers to distinguish them from pallet bins or IBCs or attached lid containers. So just if you're searching for sources for these, those might be helpful terms. A little bit more expensive than the bulb crates, particularly new. That said, they generally are not offered for sale used. I don't think I've ever really seen many of these offered for sale used because they don't really they don't die. They just find other uses, it seems. And I know some had one grower respond to a recent query that they've been using the same Buckhorn containers for 20 or 30 years, and just really pleased with the durability. They stack easily when used, you know, and they nest when they're not being used. So that's kind of nice. They have there's a return ratio on containers in the shipping world, and it's the how many you can ship in the same, how many empty containers you can ship in the same space as a full container on a return trip. And so these have return ratios of like 5, 3 or 5. So you can, so it gives you a sense of how much you can store in them. They're easily labeled. You can see on the right-hand side an example of a white grease pen on for also showing them around more easily, especially when empty. I've noted that you can get them with vented sides, a little bit harder to find, but typically these are preferred when using when you want a closed container for retaining humidity. I've noted that they're moderately easy to clean. I think there are some challenges cleaning these, and that they can be more expensive than other options. One thing to note is you can buy these direct from Buckhorn. It's a $5,000 minimum order, which is about 500 or 600 totes, and that's one reason why it's people often will go to a reseller or distributor, or try to piece together a bulk order. This is on Global Industrial, one of the resellers for these containers, just to give you a sense of the variety available. You can get different colors. So if you want to try to use color coding as a way of separating uses of containers, for example, maybe have only gray containers used for harvest and red containers go to market, or something like that for separating the use and cleaning of containers, etc. So different colors, but also all the different sizes that are available. Red and yellow lugs, these are also sometimes referred to as agricultural containers or harvesting containers, agricultural baskets, or just lugs. These are two of the most popular options that Treyvor has mentioned from Brookdale that they offer. Two sizes here. The red is, I think, noted as having a 40-pound capacity, and yellows, it's slightly less than that, 3/4 or something like that of that. So again, these stack based on the rotation, what they call a half turn. So they stack in one direction, but then will nest if it's turned 180 degrees around. Relatively easy to clean. You can see the surfaces are there's not a lot of seams or nooks and crannies, so pretty easy to clean. They have drain holes in the bottom and vents on the side, but nowhere near as open as the bulb crate, or not as much surface area. And then there's this big leap to pallet bins. So any of these other options we just talked about can, of course, be stacked on a pallet for moving purposes. But a number of the growers we work with really appreciate having something that allows for bulk storage and movement, more along the lines of a pallet bin. The brand names are Macro Bin or Decade. The generic term for some of these are intermediate bulk container, or IBC. You may have heard that before. And that covers a lot of other types of pallet bins as well, but these sometimes fall into that category. More expensive. You can see they're about $130 to $170 per bin. I think, like anything else, a volume buy, a bulk buy will bring that down. There are rental options available nationwide too. So there are companies that just specialize in renting these bins as well. Can be tricky to clean, particularly on a small farm that's using these, for example, for winter storage. So the pallet bin is relatively large compared to the rest of the spaces in the operation. So while there are cleaners or machines specifically designed for cleaning these, on most of the farms that in our area, this would be a hose down, someone climbing around it to clean type job. There are also, what's shown here is a solid pallet bin, but there are collapsible versions. And I should note, there are also collapsible versions of bulb crates as well. And it seems to be hit or miss whether people really like those. There are people who, I mentioned the fact that these take up a lot of space when they're empty. There are growers who really like the collapsible bulb crates. And then there are others who have tried them and found them to be less durable, or they just don't feel quite as solid and have moved on. So it's kind of a hit or miss thing, personal preference, and maybe it says a little bit about the finesse on particular farms. I don't know. When talking about bins and containers, definitely want to touch on cleaning and sanitizing. This is something that does come up pretty routinely in chatting with Hans with regard to, for example, CAPS plans, food safety plans, and everybody has a plan in place for cleaning and sanitizing the bins. And what we're starting to realize is it might actually be helpful to have maybe a couple different kinds of plans for this. One being, an initial determination of whether a bin needs to be cleaned or not, and then sorting out what needs to be cleaned and from what doesn't. And that could be based on schedule, it could be based on just observation. Is it actually dirty? And then having maybe a quick sort of reset cleaning that Hans refers to this as a reset cleaning. So sort of a quick rinse, focus, scrub, rinse type thing, and then a deep clean SOP, and for more thorough cleaning, maybe a more scheduled basis. And one of the key things we want to emphasize is keeping tools, cleaners, and sanitizers in a known spot. Have them be dedicated to the purpose of cleaning and sanitizing, and that they should be cleanable themselves. And we saw these containers. There's corners and lots of interesting surface area and nooks and crannies, places to pay attention to when doing the cleaning task, and then always allowing for complete air drying. And last but not least, have a place where we can store these that would prevent contamination from birds and rodents, for example, among other things. So just a reminder of the 5 steps of cleaning and sanitizing from the Produce Safety Alliance grower training on the right-hand side there, for those who might want a refresher. So that's bins and containers. I want to chat about a little bit more about bags and liners as well. And a lot of this comes down to what the use is. Is it a bag being used, for example, for storage versus marketing or going to retail, or CSA versus selling to a retailer, for example. What size is needed? Should it be a solid bag, or should it be vented with holes in it? Clear versus opaque. Lots of different things to consider here. Even seems obvious when you see it here, but even as simple as how do we close the bag? Fold over the top with a sticker, or does it need to be a twist tie? Or again, depends on where it's headed and what your preferences are and how your labor's set up. And the other point is using liners, using bags as liners as a food safety practice. So a liner within a tote, as an example. Had a picture of that on the very first slide, just as an example. So you can see that this worker is pouring some greens into a liner that's going into a tote. So just to sort of put a little bit more space between needed cleanings on the tote, and also helps maintain some humidity inside. So one of the most common options for bags is just what we all know as a clear poly bag. And so these tend to be something like 2 or 4 mil polyethylene, usually lower, usually thinner, polyethylene or polypropylene. Loads of sizes available for these things from lots of different vendors. The sort of most accessible for smaller volume is something like a U-line, where it's between 1 cent and 10 cents per bag in quantities of 500 to 1,000. And like many of these things, if you go to a sort of go up the supply chain to someplace like Atlantic Poly, who's actually making the product and can brand it for you with your farm name, for example, you can get lower prices at higher quantities. So these are available lots of different places, and even where we don't really want them, such as on the roadside. And so we'll get into that a little bit later on. Lots of options, lots of sizes. One of the key factors to think about here is gusseted versus flat. I'm going to stop the screen share for a second because I want to show a couple examples. This is a flat bag, and so it really is just that. It's flat, and the seam goes. There's a seam here, and then there's a seam up both sides. And and when you see this listed on a website, you'll see it listed with 2 dimensions. It's this dimension and the length, right? The width and the length. I can back up a bit. This one is for crickets that my son buys for his lizard. And then that's a flat bag, and then there's a gusseted bag. And so with a gusseted bag, there's actually 3 dimensions to it. And the nice thing about that is, as you're trying to fill it, it actually opens up, and as you fill it, it forms more of a 3-dimensional container that can actually support itself. So if you've ever tried to fill a flat bag and found trouble with that, a gusseted bag might do more for you. And this is a side gusset, so the bottom seam is a straight line, but then on the sides it has a bit of it's a gusset, a flute of some sort. But you can also get bottom gusseted bags where the sides are a seam and the bottom opens up, so this can sit and be supported really easily. So something to pay attention to as you're shopping around and looking at different options. You may see only 2 dimensions shown, most likely going to be a flat bag. If there are 3 dimensions shown, it's probably gusseted, and that gives you a better sense of what the 3-dimensional shape will look like. And we talked about them being used as liners as well. So those are available. Poly bags are available as both solid, but also you can get them perforated, or what's commonly referred to as vented. And the yellow circles on this carrot bag photo show where there are perforations or vents, little holes put in the bag for carrots in this case. And this is kind of an example of where there probably could be more venting, right? I mean, one of the things I think some growers look at this and say, great, there's condensation there. I know it's got high humidity. I look at that and I see condensation. I think maybe it's retaining a bit too much, and maybe it needs to be better ventilated. Depends a little bit on how long they're going to be in the bag. If this is going into storage for 6 months, there's probably going to be some issues. If this is a bag going out to a retailer from storage, which is what it looks like because it's coming out of a bulk bin, then it's probably fine. This is so perf bags or vented bags. A grower on the listserv noted that IntroPack up in Quebec is a vendor they've been very pleased with for getting these bags, and they have 25-pound bags in lots of different sizes. I don't know if Hans is on the call. Let me see. He is. Good. So Hans, if you want to unmute, feel free. This is an example of a vented bag that Hans brought to my attention from a grower who just started using them. And it's an example, it's kind of like the bottom gusseted bag I showed with tea in it, that is sort of self-supporting once it's full, but has nice vents in it. And you can see it's not vents all over, but they're fairly high density on the ends and on the bottom to allow for drainage out the bottom and ventilation through the bag. So Hans,
hey,
anything
Chris,
else?
Yeah, just that, this grower, I was telling Chris, had gone on and on about these because he has a farm stand, also sells a lot of retail, but these packed these beans and other lettuce. He had a couple different bags, and he switched to these bags and was selling like, I don't know, he said something like, his sales went out through the roof just because of the way the bag held the product and the the visuals and the durability, longevity, shelf life. So it's you know, it's something to think about if you're packing and especially selling retail, trying to manage that and manage the visual appeal as well. That's it.
Yeah, thanks, Hans. Really appreciate that, and thanks for bringing this up. The one place I found these at least readily available was websprout.com. Again, these tend to be where they're most easily accessible and available. There are certainly options where you could get these higher volume at lower price, but again, 13 cents a bag. If you're doing some direct retailing, that may well be reasonable for you. So. Another common bag being used is plastic woven, or this is one that had lots of different names: polywoven, woven poly, woven plastic, sandbags, grain bag. You know, it's the woven polypropylene plastic bag that you often might get cover crop seed in, for example, in larger quantities. So these are pretty reasonable, even new. But in response to the note on today's webinar, Brad Law from Laws Ag reached out and said that he literally has thousands of these that he throws away each year, and it irks him. He wants to find a better use for them. So if anybody has a need for these, they're coming to him carrying turf seed that is non-GMO and untreated. It is not organic. So if you need organic certification, that would perhaps present a problem. I don't know. But if you're looking for other, cheap to free options for storage bags, Brad Laws at Laws Ag in Brandon would be the person to chat with. Again, fairly inexpensive considering that these are 25 or 50 pound bags. And you can see on the left-hand side an example of a grower who's using these to put up 50 pounds at a time stacked on pallets, and this was in a shipping container. So it really was part of their handling approach, packing into bags, going into storage, so that as they washed coming out of storage for their CSA, they were handling two to 6 bags a time, and it just was sort of a unitized movement, which is nice.
Hey, Chris, did you see the chat from Becky there?
No. What's up, Becky?
So I don't know, Becky, if you want to unmute, but it's basically that these bags, unfortunately, they photodegrade into 1 million pieces, so they shouldn't be used for outside storage,
Outside.
I'm assuming.
Yep. Thanks,
That
Becky.
actually wasn't me who typed that.
We've done that with a soil bag.
Yeah, I guess we've had some issues here.
Every time we reuse the soil bags, they fall apart that way.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Not for
Appreciate that. I did note that there are some vendors that do offer UV stabilized options. I have no idea what that entails, but yeah, that's a good point. We all know what happens to the blue tarps that are made of the same material. So, okay, so we talked a lot about plastic, and it drives me crazy. But one of these necessary evils, or is it? And some growers reached out and said, well, what are some more sustainable options, and where are we on this? And this is something I'd love to hear from anybody on the call who maybe has some direct experience with this. But what I've been able to find so far is it's pretty limited, and there does seem to be some lack of standardization on what is actually meant by compostable or biodegradable. So there are claims made sometimes by vendors that are sort of hard to run down. They do tend to be made of naturally derived polymers, either from corn or wood fiber, and you can get them to be clear that all of the bags shown here are from biological sources. And you can see the one in the center from Clear Bags, which is a large web-based distributor, is clear, and that's gusseted on the side, so it can hold a loaf of bread, for example, or greens. And the other one that I found was Nashville Wraps, which one of the differences between these is that the product available at Clear Bags is a corn-based polymer, and Nashville Wraps uses a wood-derived polymer, so they're both converting cellulose or starch into a plastic, but not inexpensive, all things considered, but perhaps justifiable depending on the market. And on the sort of low end of the spectrum here was these biodegradable dog waste bags, which are about 13 cents a piece, even at low volume. So I just want to take a break there for a second and see if anybody has anything to add to that. I see, is it Becky? I don't know if it's Becky or Scott, but somebody mentioned home compostable is a useful phrase. If you want to add more to that, that'd be great. And anybody else who wants to unmute and talk about this, I'd love to hear what people are thinking or have experience talking about.
I'm not going to say much, this is Hans, about this, but I do know that there's advances made with these clear poly bags, and that have selective gas exchange, and they're pretty fancy bags, but they can increase the longevity a long time, twice or 3 times for different products. They're specifically made for the markets, and I'm not sure they're necessarily a good option at all for our growers, but they are out there, and I'm not prepared to talk about them.
Yeah, Hans, just if I could clarify, so that's not specifically a biodegradable compostable bag, but it's a modified atmosphere bag. Is that packaging? Is that what you're talking about?
That's correct. I was sort of referring back to this whole section. That's all I'm talking about.
Yep. Thank you. Yeah, so there are bags that basically are sort of like controlled atmosphere storage for apples, but in a bag form, and can modify the atmosphere to remove oxygen, so the product lasts longer, for example. Anybody else have anything they want to say about bags? Anybody using a biodegradable bag?
I guess I'll add something.
Thanks, Annie.
This is Annie Harlow. I do a fair amount of work through Farm to Plate with retail grocers and distributors. And one of the things that I've been seeing and reading and hearing is that because of the pandemic, there's been a lot of increase through stores for single serve packaging, both in prepared foods and family size packaging for family meals and things like that. And one of the areas that is very disheartening is the amount of plastification because of the pandemic, and the way that the stores are actually selling food is a lot more packaging, not only from the food service departments but from the produce departments, and trying to keep things safe. And it just seems that the longer the pandemic goes on, the more impact we're going to see in the waste stream. And with generational concerns and climate change and environmental degradation still out there as a concern for shoppers, it'd be really interesting to see if some of these compostable / sustainable options actually can gain significant traction. And as I said, I'm hearing that stores would love to have more of it, but they also know that on the disposal side, it's no guarantees, as you're saying, that these packages would actually be able to be composted and whatnot. But just from a point of view, I think it's kind of interesting.
Yeah, totally agree. I think there's a lot more to be done here, and I actually the preparing for today led me to reach out to some of our colleagues in the food processing world, where they may be a little bit further along on some of these questions, to see if we might be able to steal from them and bring it into the produce world. So yeah, a lot more to be done here, and I think we'll keep digging into it. Thanks, Annie. Jonathan Burt noted we're having a hard time finding bio bags that are both cost effective and don't let veggies dry out. That is something somebody else brought up, is that they found with cellophane packaging in particular, their greens dry out much more quickly something to do with not only the material itself, but how it seals, how you close the package. It doesn't quite fold over as nicely and give a good seal. Thanks, Jonathan. Thanks, Annie. Anybody else have experiences to add to this?
This is Scott.
Hey, Scott.
I've been kind of the way we're going these days is to use the polyethylene, but to use the least amount possible. So using like a half mil or less for the salad mix. So thinking we're going to have to use it, but just trying to use as little as possible instead of like the nicer 1 mil or 2 mil bags.
Great idea. Yeah, you can basically get bags in any along any gradation in at least 1 mil increments, if not more fine than that. And yeah, when you think about how long they're used, certainly don't need, you know, you don't need greenhouse poly. That's
right,
for sure.
right.
So, yeah, great option. Anybody else? Okay, I did want to talk in addition to bags about some of the ways we actually fill the bags. And some of these are pretty straightforward and simple ideas. It does seem as though from time to time, the question comes up of where can I get a bag stand, particularly for filling bags of roots. And I did want to give a shout out to Rob Rock at Upstream Ag, based in Burlington, who makes these nice welded bag stands. They're $65 a piece. You can get a kit, the weld it yourself kit for $55, but if I were you, I'd buy it welded. And you know, Rob does nice work, and so this is a nice local option. You can find these other places. There's certainly through distributors or the ones that I've seen offered through like restaurant supply companies are actually pretty not quite as robust as this. So this is something built by a grower for what they need, so that it really does hold up. I want to talk a little bit about weighing and bagging tables. Can be something as relatively straightforward as just some stainless steel tables on wheels with locking casters or not. Your preference. You can have all your labels in one place, have a kitchen scale or a pricing scale or a labeling scale on one end, and really just have that become part of your post-harvest flow. Andy dug up this other option on the right-hand side, which is called a dual pack. It's a weighing bagging table from Charlie's Machinery and Supply Company, and it's a hefty price tag. It's $7,000. So what is that getting you? Well, it's all stainless. It has 2 scales with a digital readout as part of that, and you can see that these corners are made to slip right over a bag or have a bag slip right over them. For you know, more straightforward bagging, sort of as part of a flow, so less picking up and moving and more just raking in. So could be an option for somebody moving a lot of greens, and it's just something we hadn't seen until relatively recently. Andy, am I missing anything on that, or anything else that you want to add?
Yeah, that I just wanted to point out also that table has a pneumatic pinch to hold the bag. So you can see kind of the wires and stuff on the left.
Oh.
Got a button that you either press with your hand, or they might have a foot pedal option. I don't know, there's a few ways of doing so, but that holds the bag so you can, you know, use both hands to grab it, to twist tie it or stack it or whatever you're doing. And having that display right at eye level is super slick too. So ergonomics, you know, comes into play here too.
So hoping we can have a bit more discussion. Would love to hear people's experiences. We have about 15 minutes left in the hour. But again, you know, key points just being thinking about what crops are being stored or carried, at what scale, and how they'll be moved. Some of the names of the different crates sort of, you know, give away what they're meant for. Handheld container or pallet bin. And then planning ahead on purchases, and I would love to hear my understanding is the NOFA bulk buy program is no longer doing this sort of thing, but if there's more we might be able to do to facilitate bulk buys, I'd love to hear that from people. And then planning for cleaning and sanitizing. So hopefully there was something new in there for everybody. But I guess I'd like to open up questions or experiences, other comments that people have at this point.
Yeah, can you hear me, Chris?
Yeah.
Hey, this is Danielle from Route 5 Farm, and I came in a little bit late on the conversation, but I just wanted to talk a little bit more about the biodegradable plastic bags. And we have tried a number of them over the years and have moved away from them because of the smell we find really off-putting, the ones that we've tried anyway. They just kind of smell like coffee grounds, and so putting like fresh salad greens in them doesn't work. So I'm just curious if other people have found that, and or if they found a solution that works better.
Thanks for that, Danielle. Anybody else have experiences along those lines? I'll just add real quick. I've also just noted that some of the biodegradable bags really tear super easily as well. So it's one thing if it really is just a short-term use, but for example, a CSA product going out to a customer, a CSA customer that might sit in their fridge and come out of the fridge 2 or 3 times. You know, are we just kicking the can? Are they going to put it in another plastic bag at the end of the day?
Hey, Chris, this is Vern. I don't think you mentioned paper, and I know there was some chatter if it was list or emails I got, but especially for like CSA orders, I think there was some interest in moving to paper from plastic.
Great
I wonder
point.
if that's happened to folks.
Yep. Unmute, folks. Feel free to chime in. We'd love to hear from you.
Or to follow on Scott's point, you know, a paper bag with a plastic window for certain things, like bread. I imagine that's expensive, but be less plastic.
This is Casey. I live over and work over at Martha's Vineyard. We use paper bags for our CSA this year, and that works pretty well for us, mostly for peppers or other products that didn't have much humidity. And we found a lot of success with it. We mostly just marked it on the outside and took a photo so that customers knew it was coming. But we weren't able to find that, like that didn't work quite as well for our retail markets.
Thanks, Casey.
Hi, this is Julie from Red Wagon Plants over in Heinsberg.
Hey, Julie.
Hi. I wanted to know if anyone had ever heard of using wax paper, like flat squares. This would be more for like a farmer's market or a CSA. I've seen it in Europe at farmers markets where, like, as the person's like buying stuff at the market, the vendor is quickly making this cone out of wax paper that holds a shape. And then they put the produce in the cone and hand it over to the customer, and it's really slick. And I haven't seen anything like that here. I'm just wondering if anyone's seen that.
Sounds great. Anybody seeing that or doing that?
Well, it's going to be on my winter project.
Yeah, love it. So somebody else was speaking up.
It's Danielle again. Yeah, I think it's a cool idea, the wax. We use them. We use wax bags for some of our products, but just to point out that they don't really work so well for anything that's wet or you know, has any moisture to it. They just kind of get a little bit slimy, and it's not, that again is like not appealing. And paper bags, the dilemma also is like when they get wet, they don't hold up. So that's where we keep falling back on plastic, because it works with wet stuff, right?
Yeah, works too well.
Yeah. These wax squares that they had at this farmer's market, they were really thick, almost like not as thick as like the bees wrap, you know, but like really coated. I mean, they wouldn't work on something super wet, but like for us, we're looking for something for herbs that's not a plastic clamshell, so they would definitely work for us. But Danielle, where did you get your wax bags, or like what were they, like bakery bags like that thin, or were they like a more heavy duty thin?
Yeah, they were exactly that. They were just like a bakery bag, you know, and we got them from maybe just Uline or something. Nothing special.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Julie and Danielle. Great discussion. Michael Rooney noting in the chat, buddy buying is a real big drag, takes up a lot of time ahead of the purchase and afterwards also quite often. I wonder if there's a system for doing it with little time involvement. Me too. And it seems like it definitely needs somebody dedicated to it. So something to explore. Michael also notes all paper is much easier to deal with than paper with plastic. Oh, if it's entirely paper, I guess, versus paper with plastic. Paper alone is much more recyclable. Wax paper bags are good, but tend to be expensive in Michael's experience.
Hey, this is Jonathan from Spring Ledge again. We actually, after I said that, I realized that our replacement corn bags, I believe the brand is Bio Bags, and we were using them for both corn and CSAs, and they did okay, like for a biodegradable, or perhaps they were compostable or something with the, like, you know, keywords that get thrown around that not really sure what it means, but certainly perhaps a better option than plastic. And they held up better than I think we were expecting. So there's that as well.
Thanks, gentlemen.
Hi there, this is Rob Arnold, Pleasant Valley Farm. Something that hadn't come up when talking about plastic bags. We use a lot of the flat bags, flat clear plastic bags from Bunzel. We have for many years, probably a decade or more. And recently we've started to have quality issues. We could have whole cases that just refuse to open. And then sometimes they're fine, sometimes they're not. I'm curious if anyone else is seeing more quality issues with specifically plastic bags that just won't open easily and causing huge delays in packing time.
Thanks, Robert. Anybody else experiencing that?
Additionally, we have used paper bags this year since the bag ban in New York took effect, and then sort of somewhat lifted, I guess, or it was always unclear what applied, but our customers appreciate the lack of plastic generally. We've never been able to get away from plastic for the bag greens, and customers prefer the bag greens despite being given options for head lettuce and other stuff. There isn't a good way around it. But paper has been a big hit from our customer side, especially for our home deliveries and pre-orders. Some still continue to take that option as opposed to getting a reusable crate that we wash.
Thanks, Robert. Sounded like there was somebody else who was gonna bring up a point.
Hi, Chris. This is Casey again over at Morning Glory.
Hey, Casey.
I was wondering what solutions people have, more labeling, but for date stickers, expiration dates, we were using a price gun for a long time, but they just always get jammed up, and we had to replace several ones. Now we're just using like paper labels that we're putting on. But I was wondering if anyone had a solution for getting a easy to put on and not so expensive expiration date on their greens.
Great. Labeling dates. Anybody got a great system?
We just bought like a way more expensive, price gun, and it stopped being annoying, but we still get it like serviced at least once a year. There's a guy in Jericho, Vermont that services price tools so that they're running like smoothly all the time.
Would you mind sharing what way more expensive felt like?
I don't have, it's like, instead of being in the whatever $120 range, it's closer probably to a $300 price gun.
Yeah. And is that a sticker price gun then? So it has a reel of stickers and you
Yeah, and
load
it's
it
got
up?
2 rows. So like we have a PLU or something like that, and then a date or a price or whatever we're using it for. And it works in wet conditions. We buy it from this guy. He just has like a shop at his house that I forget I can find out his name, but that's all he does is he sells and repairs price guns.
You happen to know the brand of the gun?
No, I'm not at work.
Okay. Thanks, Julie. That's great to hear.
It's not very helpful, but I can send it around to I can get the brand and send the guy's name around through the listserv or something.
Yeah. I mean, it seems like something anybody, any business that does retail solutions would be able to help people get connected with. It's great.
Thank you.
We also tried a price or a date gun, but it was for our own internal use, and we found that there just wasn't anything big enough visually to be able to see to like just tack on crates or something in a cooler quickly. So we stopped using it because it was just there was no everyone had a standard size for those date guns, and like there just wasn't anything bigger. Like we wanted something like 3 times as big that just you could see from looking at a crate, but it doesn't seem to be any good options.
Is anybody using a either a barcode printer or a custom label printer that's either connected with their scales or just printing sheets at a time, for example, as you're packing a product? Something larger scale like Robert's referring to.
I've set them up for people. I think the reason we liked the date gun was because you could just walk up and go snap, snap, snap whenever you wanted to do it instead of printing a label, then peeling the label off, and then sticking the label. And then, at least the date gun labels just came off later. They're a very temporary situation for us. So I know about label printers. I've set them up before for barcode scanning and stuff, but for the date purposes, it seemed to be a lot of effort.
Yep.
If I'm not mistaken, I haven't heard the dreaded word clamshell used this entire time, and I'm not promoting it, but I do know that like for small whatever like herbs and things like that, there are some growers that use them. I don't know if anyone has had experience with that or with especially like the corn-based clear options, which I don't really think are biodegradable, even though they say they are.
Yeah, we have some good experience with that. This is Casey over at Morning Glory. We used to use the Evolution brand clamshells, which were the corn-based reusable ones. Recently, the supply chain has cut off on that, and we did have to switch over to plastic. We use them just for our microgreens to be able to store them and try to isolate it just to those. The other products we use them for, like nettles. But they work well. They have a slight green tinge to them on the corn-based ones, but we didn't really find that too much of an issue. They have a separate lid and bottom. We transitioned to plastic, unfortunately, just because we aren't able to source them at the moment.
Julie, what about you at Red Wagon? Don't you guys have some retail packages with that?
Yeah, we use a lot of clamshells, unfortunately. They keep the herbs, looking great for weeks, so our customers really like them, but we're definitely actively looking for a different way to do it. Yeah, hopefully in the next 2 years we'll be no longer using clamshells. That's our goal.
All right, we'll check back.
Yeah, Julie, you're not alone on that plan. The one thing I heard loud and clear was that folks want alternatives. So definitely emphasizes it for me. It's something.
Yeah, I've heard the same thing, Chris. Talking with Brian Bates and others, he started the movement for clamshells in his area in Michigan, and he wants desperately to get away from them. He can't stand the storage space they require, the plastic they use, but their effectiveness is just it's uncomparable.
It's true. I mean, I think our next move is probably, if I can't figure out this wax paper thing, will be some sort of sturdy paper bag with a cellophane window or something like that. But I don't know. I don't think that the herbs will keep quite as well, but I think that's okay.
Well, one thought to wrap this up with, this is Vern, is, if some products are identified that really have the qualities growers want, and especially if they're somewhat expensive and bulk buying brings the price down, this could be something that the VVBGA/extension figures out a way to do the kind of bulk buys Chris mentioned when he started, because it sure seems like I'm hearing the interest on this webinar and elsewhere too.
Yeah, and for containers too, for bins, Vern, it was kind of remarkable once you sort of start asking that question about the bulk buy. People are definitely interested in having access to that type of thing, so we should chat about it. Great, really appreciate the discussion, especially folks speaking up. If anybody has any final thoughts?
Well, thanks so much, Chris. Tons of great information. We will post the slides and the recording. And note that there's a new website for hosting those things. And keep reminding people of that for the next short time.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good one.
Thank you all.